Good evening. My name is Simon Jacobson. I welcome you all, and the web audience as well, and those that are here and watching it on the web, which is a rare occurrence. Because usually the whole benefits of the web, at least in this generation, is still a one-way street. You could be sitting in your bubble bath and the comfort of your own, under your blanket, and benefiting from viewing this, and no one on this end sees what's going on over there. So it's almost like playing God. You watch us and we don't see you. But I'm sure the future generations of the web, it'll be a double two-way street. But I guess people will be able to choose to opt to see each other or not. Anyway, since it's a week, a few days, exactly a week before the holiday of Shavuot, which is the holiday that comes 50 days after Passover, the holiday that commemorates, among other things, it commemorates the giving of the Torah at Sinai, which happened 3,324 years ago. Coming from this will be 3,324 years next week. So I thought appropriate to talk about this in somewhat of a pre-Shavuot workshop. Philip is correcting me. Yes, what would you like to say? 3,300 and?
23.
No, we're ending 23. It's becoming 24. That's the studying of 24. It happened in 2448. The Sinai event happened in 2448. So, of course, in the year Tafshinayim Bey, meaning the 5772 will be, but technically the beginning starts at Sinai. I know you're a little older than me, so you're a little closer to Sinai than I am, but according to the theory of evolution, I'm more evolved than you, because I'm further this way. It's an insider's joke for those that don't get it. It's the benefits of membership. You've been able to understand these inside jokes. So, I thought appropriate to talk about this significance of this holiday. And as is the custom in this class, to do so in a way that's relevant to our personal lives. You know, much has been written and said about Sinai, and many books, literature, religious texts. You know, Sinai has become popularized by the Cecil B. DeMille film called The Ten Commandments, and in many other, as I said, texts. And of course, it has its religious value as being the story of Sinai, Mount Sinai, the biblical story of where God appears on the mountain, meets Moses, tells the Ten Commandments, gives the human race the divine mandate, the purpose of existence. So there's much to be said about such a significant day and holiday. But above all, the challenge and the question is, what is their personal relevance to us? There's many angles to that as well, and I've talked about it in different years, in different contexts. I felt that today we'll do it in a context of called discovering your inner child. And the reason for that is because based on a medrash is one of the oral interpretations of the Bible, of the Torah, things that were taught and given at Sinai but were passed on verbally instead of in writing. So the medrash says that at Sinai, when God was about to give the Torah to the people, he asked for guarantors. For a guarantor. You know, whenever you give something valuable to someone, and especially something really precious, you want a guarantor, you want some collateral. So the Jewish people said to God, our ancestors will be our guarantors. We have great ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. They paid heavy price. They paid their price, the dues, and they will be our guarantors. And you can turn to them to assure that we will commit to this Torah. And God rejected this. So then they offered, the Medrash continues, they offered as a guarantor, they offered the prophets, which include Moses, was the first of all prophets, the greatest prophet of them all. They offered the prophets, and God too rejected that. And then they offered the children. Banenu arevim maisanu, or banenu arevim ba'adenu. Our children will be our guarantors, the people said, and God accepted that. On the most basic level, the reason for that, what do the children have that the ancestors and the prophets don't have? Is that the children are the future. The ancestors are our past. The prophets are the present. But the children are the future. And if you want a guarantor that something will be committed to, will be maintained, you don't want to just know that we had great-grandparents that were committed. You want to know that there's a future tomorrow, next generation. That's on the most basic level. But then, of course, the question is, why did they not understand that on their own? It's a pretty simple logic. It's not something that requires any special divine intervention. They still said the ancestors, the prophets. And why only the ancestors and the prophets? Why didn't they offer the sages, the rabbis, the teachers, the fathers, the mothers? I mean, there are many, many qualified guarantors. So I don't know if I'll get into answering all those questions, but I'll try to answer as many as possible. But the most important thing is to understand on a deeper level is, besides beyond the basic, as I said, that it's a guarantee of the future, there's something much deeper going on here. And this goes into the whole purpose of Sinai in the first place. Which really brings to maybe another question, which is, why did God ask for guarantors in the first place? And what was he thinking before that? I mean, here he kept the Jews in Egypt for over 200 years, told them that the whole purpose of it is to bring them to Sinai to receive this mandate. From the beginning of time, the purpose was to come one day to Sinai and receive the Torah, and then march on to the Promised Land. And suddenly, the morning or whenever it was of the giving of the Torah, God suddenly remembers, hey, we need some guarantors. I mean, imagine for years and years you're preparing for some type of transaction, and then suddenly the seller or the bequeather of the gift decides he's the guarantors. And what would happen if they hadn't come up with guarantors? The whole thing would have gone somewhere. So the whole thing begs more explanation, the whole episode, to understand really what's going on here in the context of ancestors, prophets, children. And as I said, above all, the story is the story of our own lives. So understand this. Let me step back and share with you another interesting statement in the Talmud, also about Sinai. It says the following. It says, at Sinai, the toxins, poskazu moson, the toxins that were infused into existence when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, came to a halt. Basically, Sinai had purified the environment of the world to the point where it brought it back to pre-tree of knowledge, the sin of the tree of knowledge state of affairs, which is a big thing, as we shall discuss. And then, 39 days later, after they built the golden calf, chazra zumasan. Zuma is a Aramaic word for the word poison or toxin. Tuma. In Hebrew, the word tuma means a spiritual toxin, spiritual impurity, the opposite of tara, which is purity. And Zuma is the Aramaic of that. And when they built the golden calf, the toxins that came into the existence when the tree of knowledge was eaten from, of good and evil, were returned. This is a statement in the Talmud and elaborated a bit in the Zohar, which obviously puts into context the Sinai in a much broader and universal global context, which also discusses our own life today. The real thing here is not just about events that happen in history, but it's really about the nature of life and of existence. Just for contrast purposes, everybody's familiar with the context of the content or the idea of original sin. It's not a Jewish concept. It's a Christian one. Original sin, referring to the sin of the tree of knowledge from the Bible. According to Christian theology, this original sin contaminated the universe, and the devil took control. And the only way to redeem yourself is through believing in a certain Jew. That is essential Christian theology. I'm only using it here for contrast purposes because it is a distortion of the concept of sin in general, especially associated with sexuality. So according to that same theology, sexuality is a necessary evil. So we live in a world which is controlled by evil. And there are some necessary evils. There's no way around that. In direct contrast to that, Judaism does not believe in original sin. It believes that this universe is essentially a good place, and human beings are essentially good people. And even though that goodness can be concealed and can go into hiding, but it always remains fundamentally there and always accessible to each of us. As we shall see, this will be the concept of the true original inner child. So though each of us goes through stages in our lives from young age to maturity where we lose our innocence and we become somewhat controlled by the toxins of this universe and of life's experiences, but no matter how toxic the environment and how toxic your life may have become, at the heart of it remains a pilot flame that always remains burning. So that inner child that preceded all our experiences in life that may have hurt us and in some ways contaminated us does not really and cannot really destroy that inner innocence, the inner child within us. This is a small introduction. Now, what does this mean more specifically? So in Kabbalistic thought and in general psychological thought from a Jewish perspective, everything is always seen as a microcosm, macrocosm. Which means if you want to understand history well, you have to understand human development well. And if you want to understand human development well, you have to understand history well. Because they both are mirror images. Whatever happens to you in your personal life, in some ways reflected in the stages of history. And vice versa. So the way the Kabbalah puts it is that the early stages in history are compared to the early formative years of an individual's life. The later stages in history, or the middle stages, the Middle Ages are like middle age in a person's life, and the later stages in history is like the older years, the more mature years. So even though each of us goes through it in our personal level, but history is also a story of development from a very early innocence all the way to all the ups and downs and everything we go through in life. Obviously, it would be more wonderful, nothing would be more wonderful to each of us, I'm sure, if you were able to reconnect at will to your most purest and innocent moments of life. You know, when we say a person has a moment of truth, a magical moment, an enchanting moment, and we all do have them from time to time. Usually they come not unplanned. When you have it, you know what it feels like. It's a certain profound resonance of something that everything makes sense suddenly. You feel like you belong. This could happen standing in the middle of a beautiful natural scene. It could happen when you fall in love. It could happen when you hear a song. Or it could just happen in the middle of nowhere, walking down the street and just having some epiphany. What we will learn here tonight is that you can actually access this at will. It doesn't have to happen to you. You can make it happen if you know how to reach that place inside of yourself, because it's always there. The problem is there's another part of our personality that develops, that is, we'll call it our conscious personality, that you think that's what defines you right now. So most of us, if we were asked right now, what defines your life, you'll start describing the sum total of what's going on today in your life. I mean today, I don't just mean today, yesterday, sum total of the last few years. Very few of us can just suddenly say, you want to know what's going on in my life? Going back into our unconscious, all the way back to our childhoods, and talk about our lives juxtaposing the past and the present and the future. Because we live in the moment. I've given this analogy, I believe, in the past regarding time. Jewish thought teaches that time is like a flow. So usually we think of a flow like a flow of the river. So imagine the river being the river of time. The past is that, and you are on a boat on that river, floating down that river of time. The past is where the boat was yesterday, the future is where the boat will be tomorrow, and the present is where the boat is right now. So, as it is with time, the present is what we are consumed with. That's all you see. You remember yesterday, you don't know what will be tomorrow. But now imagine, while you're on this boat, a bird that flies, a bird suddenly flies from the sky, flies onto your shoulder, let's say, while you're sitting on this boat. Now the bird, remember, has a bird's eye view and is able to see the banks of the river, not just of today, but also yesterday and tomorrow. Because the bird is not right now on the boat. But the bird now joins you on the boat, so now it's with you here. This is the analogy of the difference between the body and the soul. The body is the body that is sitting on the boat that can only experience through our sensory tools what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, and what we smell. That's a very present experience. You can remember a sensory experience of yesterday. You can remember it very vividly, but it's still yesterday. The soul is like a bird. The soul comes from a space that's higher than the river, a place that's higher than the river, and has the ability to transcend time in that sense. And has the ability to actually go back into the past, not just through memory, actually retrieve it, and the way also has a way of sensing some of the future. This doesn't mean necessarily prophecy. It just means it has a sense that's more transcendent to that tangible and very concrete, rigid past, present, and future of things. It sees life much more in context of a field of energy than as particles. In other words, from a material body perspective, we see life piece by piece by piece. The frames. The soul sees life as the film, as the entire story, and the frames are just pieces of one bigger picture. And therefore, it embraces the mystery of the frames that are yet to come. Whereas the body and the material world just sees the frame right now and is consumed by it. That's why a person who's soulful is able to ride through things much easier. Because they know all of life is a process. All of life is a journey. There's no such thing as this is the end of the story. Kierkegaard said, you can only understand your life backwards, but you have to live your life frontwards. So backwards we can see sometimes these connections. So it's the bird and the soul that allows us to see a bigger picture. So in the context of what we're discussing here, what are the stages of human development? So the stages begin from a very innocent, pure, untouched soul called a newborn child. Each of us were there once. For many of us, we think of it as something that's the past. It happened, and now I'm an adult. So for all its nice things, I'm no longer there. That's the perspective of a body on a boat. From a soul's perspective, there's no such real difference between the past, present, and the future. And if you want, you could be there. But let's talk from the perspective that the natural perspective we all have. So we begin our lives in that very pure way. 9 months spending in our mother's womb. Completely surrounded, submerged in embryonic waters. Protected, fed, nourished, everything that you need to grow in the most important part of your life. When you're literally, your cells are being formed and shaped into who you will become. So for 9 months you're completely protected from the elements. Then you emerge and the umbilical cord is cut, and this child is now breathing on its own and beginning to eat on its own, still completely dependent on an adult, on a parent, mother or father, because the child cannot take care of its own needs, but is physically now beginning to experience the world outside of itself. And we go through these stages. We start growing and developing. I'm not going to go through every literal stage. In Kabbalistic Hasidic thought, that divides it into stages of how we grow from that state to what we become adults. Mirroring that is exactly what happened at the beginning of time and history. As I said, the human being is a microcosm of history. When the world was created, the Bible says it was all covered in water. Like a child is submerged in his embryonic fluids. The physical universe was all covered in water. The earth as we know it was all submerged underwater. Mayim b'mayim is the expression. And then God went ahead and separated the higher waters and the lower waters, and land emerged. So everything was amphibious in the early stages. And the reason for it is the same reason that we needed in our early stages, because water is a symbol of purity. Water is more than a symbol of purity, it's a symbol of submerged in a reality that is greater than yourself. It is what we call in Hebrew bittul. Water embodies bittul. What is bittul? Bittul means, the Hebrew word means that you are submerged in something greater than yourself. When we say that a person submerges in a mikveh, in a sacred, in sanctified waters, we call a mikveh, ritual bath. The word in Hebrew for mikveh is tefillah, not tefillah with a pei, like prayer. Tefillah, tes vav yud lamed hey, or taval. It means to dip, actually, in one way. It means to submerge. So it says in the holy books that tefillah is the same letters as habitul. The same letters as bittul is tefillah. Because the idea is one object is submerging in something beyond itself. Think for a moment the psychological significance of that. Are you a self-made, self-indulgent, self-interest-driven human being? Or are you part of a larger whole? So this isn't just semantics. It happens to be a different type of psyche, a different type of consciousness. So we begin our lives before we emerge and become so-called separate creatures, where we can delude ourselves into thinking we are self-made and we are our own creators, meaning self-worship, you are your own God. We begin our lives submerged in the waters of a higher reality. Whether it's in a personal state like in our mother's, in the mother's womb, or in the collective state sense of it, the macrocosm, in the whole universe being submerged. And then a separation takes place. This is critical because you'll see this separation is the beginning of all dissonance. You know, when we speak about, let's say, any type of psychological malady, any psychological problem a person has, everyone here in this room, everyone on this earth, it all comes down to one word: dissonance. I know it may sound oversimplified, but that dissonance just manifests in billions of ways. So maybe there's 6 billion people on this earth, they have 6 billion different types of dissonance. So all you got to do is create a website and have 6 billion different options, and there you got it. Story of our lives. What is dissonance? Dissonance means a type of disconnect, a dichotomy. This can be the disconnect between your mind and your heart. Your heart tells you one thing, your mind tells you something else. It could be the dissonance between what the marketplace and your boss or the business world demands of you and your own personal values say something else. You know, I'm just using very, very generic, basic ones. It could be the dissonance between knowing that you are very capable of something, but for some reason you have some type of psychological fear of the unknown and just for some reason resist making a move. The dissonance can be the people that love you don't understand you. You know, you want to find someone that can love you and be completely one with you, and at the same time there's inconsistencies, inability to get to that place. The list goes on and on and on. And I can't even list them all because everybody has different dimensions of it. And more importantly, that one person himself has so many different types of dissonance. But one thing it's not is not seamlessness. So in Hebrew there's an expression, Torah expression, echad b'peh, echad b'lev. You say one thing and you feel another. Which is essentially the dissonance of this cruel world, that someone can smile to you and stab you in the back. They can speak the talk, they can say everything right, but they have no interest and are not sincere. So this concept of being insincere, of being deceptive, is this a natural state or it's not a natural state? It's a very important question. Most psychologists, most thinkers will say it's a natural state. That's how it is. Everybody in this world lies. Everybody in this world will protect themselves. Everybody can be bought. Everybody, there's a line when it comes to self-preservation. That's all that really matters. And there's big grave consequences and far-reaching implications if that's how we see each other and ourselves. The Torah says, Torah psychology says, that deception by its very nature is an unnatural state. Because the natural state of existence is submerged in water. Everything is seamless. And the proof of it is, there's no such thing as a child that's born a liar. You learn to lie. It's not inherent. No matter how good a liar you are and how much you think it's inherent, that's because you mastered the art. But no one is born a liar. A child does not lie until it's taught or it learns by example to lie. That's why children will say everything. You have to tell your child, don't tell others what's going on in this house. You know? When a child is hurt, the child is threatened to be silent. Because a child doesn't understand two worlds. A fish in water doesn't understand anything outside of water. This is it. I'm submerged. This is reality. It's called in Hebrew emes. And emes is a natural state of existence. Now, of course, it's predicated on the principle that survival of the fittest is not the driving force of existence, but that there's a higher truth to everything. So we all know the word emes in Hebrew is made up of 3 letters. Aleph, Mem, Taf. Is the first, the 11th, and the 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet, because it reflects, Hebrew is a metaphorical language that reflects the nature of the names, of the words, of the ideas that the words convey. And emes is saying that something is true, it's true in the beginning, through the middle, till the end. If something is only true in certain limited conditions, rest assured it's not true anywhere. And just to use a scientific simple model for that, when they do experiments, if you experiment something and you prove a certain theory, you have to experiment under all kinds of conditions, because maybe it's only true in normal temperature. What happens when there's extreme heat, or extreme cold, or where there's no oxygen, or there's no gravity? So a test of truth of the theory has to be able to be proven under many circumstances, not just under one set of circumstances. So emes dictates that very simply. It's true in the beginning, Aleph, Mem through the middle, Taf to the end. And just in case you think this is just some fabricated, nice, cute coincidence, it's actually the Yerushalmi says it, the Jerusalem Talmud says this about the emes. Sheker, which is also a Hebrew word, which means the opposite of emes, lie, is also 3 letters. And those 3 letters are all bunched right near each other. The next to last 3 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Kuf, Resh, and Shin. Sheker, Shin, Kuf, Resh. Why? Because Sheker ein le raglayim, it says, a lie doesn't have feet to stand on, so lies always congregate near other lies. Every lie needs a companion, because one lie has to cover up for the other one. Truth is very secure. You know, what's one of the problems with lying? You never know where you lied. You have to constantly remember where you lied. Truth doesn't have that problem. So every lie needs other lies for support. You need an alibi. You need someone else. There's no such thing as a lie that stands on its own. It always will need some type of cover-up. That's how it is. That's sheker. So, truth is seamless, and seamlessness is the natural state of the human psyche. And it's some point in life when we learn, usually early on, we learn from our parents or from the attitudes of those around us. We learn to create dissonance, where what you say and what you feel is not the same, and where there's 2 different worlds. There's who you are, what you do, duplicity, and all that comes with it, to the point that becomes the default state for most people. And that tragedy is, once we leave the world of innocence and seamlessness, we think we can never return. So you have all these novels and poems and songs. It's all about the search for paradise, the search for Eden. Everyone's looking for that, for the innocence of their childhood, some will say. For those that are Hollywood buffs, everyone's looking for their rosebud. as in Citizen Kane. So, the tree of knowledge, when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, is a watershed moment in this context, because that's when two human beings, Adam and Eve, the first man and woman, went over from a state of seamlessness to a state of dichotomy and dissonance. That was the first dissonance experienced in history. What happened? So you have the story goes like this. God tells Adam and Eve, there's a tree of life, there's a tree of knowledge, good and evil. You'll eat from the tree of life, but do not eat from the tree of knowledge. The day you will eat from it, you will die. So comes a serpent in the Garden of Eden. This is the biblical story, and of course seduces, incites them, and say, why does God not want you to eat from that tree? We all like the waters, the forbidden waters are always sweeter. So instead of focusing on the tree of life, which sounds pretty appealing, but since God said you can't eat from something, we got to explore this. So the serpent, in a whole series of seductions, convinces them that there's some secret here God does not want you to know. Eat from this tree of knowledge. And when they do eat from the tree of knowledge, and then everything changes. Not original sin, as I mentioned, but everything changed. What really changed? So it really would require a long discussion, and I've done it, and I have discussed it, and I think I actually wrote an article, a long article. If you want more information of what I'm going to say now briefly, I'll be happy to send you the link, or you can find it on meaningfullife.com. Basically, it was the birth of consciousness that took place. Now, most of us, when we hear the word consciousness, we consider that to be a virtue, right? A person is conscious. You don't want to hear that someone's unconscious, or someone's in a coma, or so numb that they're not aware of what's going on. Well, I'll let you in on a secret here. That consciousness is actually a state of an inferior state to a state that is not called consciousness. I'll explain what I mean. When you're conscious of something, it immediately means there's an object and a subject. There's you that's conscious of something. When you're in the zone and you're really experiencing its fullest sense, you're not conscious of it. It's just happening. As soon as you become conscious, it's already disconnect. So, for example, right now, if I asked you, well, you'll know in a moment when I'm going to ask you, what is your left leg doing? So now you think about it, you're suddenly conscious of it. But a moment before, where was your left leg? It was still there. Life itself is not conscious of life until you think about it. Because it's so seamless. If someone said, what does life feel like? What does it look like? You'd say, if you feel it, if you can describe what it feels like, there's a problem. It shouldn't feel like anything. Breathing should be as seamless without any feeling. Your heart beats. It's when your heart's beating fast or something's wrong, that's when you start feeling it. The most beautiful and powerful experiences in life of real intimacy with an experience is one where you become melted into the object and the subject become one, where you can't even distinguish between the two. You're very much immersed in a project. You suddenly realize hours pass, you don't even know what time it is. You realize, I'm hungry, I'm tired. Why didn't you feel it a moment before? Because you were so much into it. You and the thing you were doing became one. Anyone that is creative in writing, in music, in art, has experiences. Those are the greatest experiences. When you're so into it, your fingers are literally just channeling something. And you're not even aware. As soon as you become aware, it's not a good sign. Now you can't always call that up, that type of state. But if you're trained, you know how to do to get to a state like that. So if you think about it, then saying consciousness, to be conscious, is not necessarily such a great virtue. Yes, it's better than conscious is better than being completely in denial and when you're in trouble. So conscious in that sense, conscious compared to someone who's completely oblivious is obviously superior. But conscious compared to someone who's in it, immersed completely and is one with it, is far inferior. So just to use an example, I say some tzaddikim, the ones that were really in the zone, are so aligned with the spiritual energies that flow, they don't have to look at a calendar to know when it's Shabbos. They feel the energy, it's just natural to them. They don't need to know even what time Well, they don't need to know a clock to know that it's day or night, because they are in touch with energy. They are like aligned with the energies that flow. Now, many of us may not relate to that directly, but I guarantee you, all of you have in certain situations where you're able to have such sensitivity. That's a person who's completely aligned with an experience where there's really no distinction between you and the experience. So take now fish in water. Here's the question. Can a fish get wet? Better question, can water get wet? I know it sounds like some type of pun, but it's not. Dry things get wet. Wetness doesn't get wet. Wetness is a state of being. So for example, to take another example, we say the word love. Is love a noun or a verb? Is it an action? Is it a technique? Is it a method? Or is it a state of being? So some say love for women is a noun, and for men it's a verb. But if you really think about it, love in its purest form of the word, when you really are in love, or you are loved, it's like a fish in water. It's water, doesn't get wet. You and love are one. If you're experiencing it as a conscious experience, maybe it's a step one to get to a deeper place, better than nothing. But it's definitely not love in its fullest sense of the word. Love is a complete submerging experience that is not just you're experiencing at the moment, it is a state of being in its ultimate sense. All true experiences are such. That's why we call it resonance. When you say something resonates, resonates means it was there all the time and it just now touched a chord and made you aware of it. So just because you became conscious of it doesn't mean that it wasn't there before. What happened to Adam and Eve when they ate from the tree of knowledge, they did the grave error, was they now became conscious of themselves. And that was the problem. Before that, they were seamless beings. They were seamless like an innocent child, which is why it says that they were naked and they were not ashamed. Why is a newborn child not ashamed of their sexuality and nudity and nakedness? So the initial knee-jerk response most of us will get, because the child is stupid and they don't understand, you have to cover yourself. That's not the case at all. A child doesn't have anything to be ashamed of, because sexuality is just a normal part of who you are. It's when adults start becoming conscious of their sexuality and conscious of other people's sexuality and conscious of your thoughts and fantasies and dreams and all your healthy and unhealthy perversions about it, that's when it becomes a whole thing. So it's true, once they ate from the tree of knowledge, they were healthy enough not to open up a nudist colony, but they were healthy enough to cover themselves because they realized they were now conscious of their sexuality and of themselves. Before that, they were just seamless in that sense. They were a state of being. After that, everything became verbs. Everything became actions now. And now you want to be spiritual, you have to go get it. Before that, spirituality was this natural state of being. There was no issue. It was like a fish in water. So when you're submerged in water, you don't need to make any effort. When you get out of the water and you're dry, you need to start searching for water for nourishment. It says when Mashiach will come, Messianic age, the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. The same state of being as it was in the beginning. What does it mean? Why waters cover the sea? Because it's seamlessness. It's not I know something. I am knowledge. There's a big difference than I am what I know, not I know something outside of me. That is how God perceives existence. Hu amada, hu yedeu, hu yedua, as the Kabbalists and the philosophers write. You become one with what it is that you know. It's intimate knowledge. That's why sexuality in Torah is called das. Adam knew Eve. It's not, how do you explain that? It's not just being nice and clean word. It's because real intimacy is about becoming one with another person. It's called knowing another person in the fullest sense of the word. It's not knowledge as in acquiring facts and the data. It's knowledge in the personal sense that you become one, intimately one with the thing that you're connected with. So that's what happened then. So when we say Zuma, toxins entered the existence, what happened was there was a dissonance was created. Now there became two worlds, who you are and what you're conscious of. And now begins the arduous journey of finding the truth. So you see people are on a journey where I'm going to find meaning in my life. From a perspective of an internal perspective, if you knew that the entire material world was just a glove to a hand inside it, there's nothing to find. It's there already. But we become so consumed in this material world with the here and now, as I said. So we are, as the thinkers say, we're physical people going on a spiritual journey. When the fact is, we're really a spiritual people going on a physical journey. But how many of us see it that way? We perceive things from the outside in, not from the inside out. To give another example of this. Everything you and I experience, except yourself, is from the outside in. How do you know that I exist, if I may ask? Besides the fact that my face and my voice is being broadcast on the line here. You know I exist because you hear me speak. You see an image. You quickly process, I look like you do, I speak like you do, I have eyes like you do, so I must be like you are in some way. How do you know this chair is in this room? You look at it, you see it's there. If there was no chair in the room, you wouldn't see it that way. How do you perceive yourself? From the inside out. You don't need to look in the mirror to know you exist. You just sense yourself from within. That is a seamless experience. So everyone in this world, no matter how much you love them, is already two things, you and them. Yourself, you have an example of a seamlessness when you look at outside. But the fact is, we also suffer from dissonance. It's not like we feel like we belong, or we feel like we're always comfortable in our own skin. When people say, I'm not comfortable in my own skin. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I want, what I need. You're essentially saying, there's two parts of you. Something is disconnected from itself. So life, you can experience from the inside out, but everything else, emotionally, psychologically, the dichotomy has now entered. And that's really the story of the rest of our lives. We're trying to reconnect. And unfortunately, because of the disconnect, we usually cause more problems than solutions. It gets worse and worse, because in our desperate need for relief, in our desperate need for seamlessness and truth, we'll do all kinds of things that will satisfy us for the moment. And in a sense, you're getting even more distant from where you should be. That's what happens. So that's what happens. You start wandering away from the source, and you start trying to find solutions, and you usually wander further with those solutions. So 26 generations pass from Adam and Eve to Sinai. And the Talmud says at Sinai, they reconnected. They reconnected to the moment that before they ate from the tree of knowledge. They were able to, for a moment, experience seamlessness. And that's why it says that the toxins, the contamination, the impurities were lifted for a while. But they brought it right back when they when they built the golden calf. They invoked what happened when they ate from the tree of knowledge. And then the rest of it is history. But we cannot say that Sinai disappeared. It just means that we have the ability to access it. Now the question is, can we access it? So how do you access Sinai? You access it by reconnecting to the inner child, to the part of ourselves that was not affected, not by the tree of knowledge, and not by the golden calf. The inner child. And that's why God wanted guarantors. He didn't just want guarantors that would guarantee the future of the Torah. He wanted the people to have an ability to reconnect to the purest part of themselves. That's the key thing with a child, with the inner child. Because the fact remains that even no matter what we've gone through life, our early years have not disappeared. They may have disappeared when you're on the boat on the river and you think in terms of the here and now like a body on a boat, but the bird has not forgotten and the soul has not forgotten. You see, the same soul that entered into your body when you were just born or just conceived is still with you right now. And the soul doesn't age because the soul is not affected by the elements of time and space that the body is affected by. So the real question is, how do you access that soul, which in turn accesses that state of being of pure seamlessness that existed before the rest of your life took over? That's the real story of Sinai, of Matan Torah. God did not just give the people a book of laws, a book of rules, a book of do this, don't do that, or the episodes and stories of the Bible. God gave us an ability to connect to the purest part of ourselves. No matter what happened in our lives, we are able to retrace and revisit that part of yourself. So, if you were to find a picture of yourself when you were a little child, or able to imagine, close your eyes and imagine the earliest memories of yourself. And then you wonder, okay, so where has all that gone in the adult that you have become, in who you are right now? So for many of us, the answer is most of it has disappeared, or most of it is just an ancient memory, irretrievable. And Sinai tells us no, absolutely not. It's totally retrievable, but there's certain things you have to do to access it, and when you do, it can change your whole life. It can change your whole life because, first of all, it gives you an anchor. It gives you something to hold on to that's deeper than all the experiences that came later in your life. But to figure out how to access it, you have to remember that we're dealing with a formidable challenge. And that is what's called the inertia of our habits and our routines. Because what has taken over the years is a new routine. The routine of your adult. And the routine of accepting as a given that we live in a duplicitous world, in a dichotomous world, in a world of dissonance. And here and there you find some relief, you find some ways of connecting. So we're not just dealing with, okay, clean slate, and we're just going to connect to Sinai, you're going to connect to the child, to the Banenu Arevim, to the guarantors. You're dealing with a whole new reality that is not cooperative exactly, and on the contrary, for many of us, has become our security blanket. So it's very difficult when you see people get attached to their teddy bears, or let's call it BlackBerries, or more sophisticated gadgets. Very difficult to get somebody to disconnect from it. It's called an addiction. So the challenge is a twofold one. How do you weaken the hold of the addiction to whatever it is you call your security blanket? And then how do you access that other part? And it's like a vicious cycle. It's catch-22, so to speak. It's a catch-22 situation in the sense that where do you begin? From which one? It would be great if you could access that pure part. It would weaken probably the hold of your new security blankets. On the other hand, if you could weaken the security blanket hold, it'd be easier to access the inner self. So this gets into the discussion maybe about somewhat the debate in psychological schools of thought, the difference between behavioral psychology and psychotherapy, internal psychology, whatever it's called. And years ago I did a little research on this to find out what the Torah's view on this is, being that modern psychology, as we know it, is basically 100 years old. I mean, obviously it's been shaped by forces before that, but with Freud and the last 20th century, that's really the main so-called standard that things are based on. And Torah goes back several thousand years. So Torah psychology, I can tell you my findings in my research is that it's a combination of both. It's not one or the other. On one hand, you have behavioral mechanisms. You can call them mitzvahs if you wish. You can call them habits. You can call them doing right things. Even if you're not in the mood of it, the fact that you do something by routine, by rote, ultimately has an impact on a person. It's very behavioral. So you'll have many times mitzvah gereris mitzvah. You do a mitzvah, it brings another mitzvah. You're not in the mood, so you have, for example, there are mitzvahs that you must have the kavanah, you must have intention, but many are not. Giving charity, for example, it's always great to do it with a smile and to do it with good intention, but if you help someone else, the bottom line, that person has been helped, you did the mitzvah. So there are many things that we can train ourselves, just like we train our children to have certain manners, certain etiquette, Even though at that point they're not yet developed and understand all the meaning behind it. But practice creates healthy routines. Healthy routines turns a person into a mensch, and hopefully at an age they will begin to appreciate and understand the deeper reasons why these routines are healthy ones. You even have a story. One of the non-Hasidim called the Litvish challenged the Alter Rebbe, the Rab Shneur Zalman, and said, your students are hypocrites. I see them davening and trying to behave so piously, and then I see them doing things that are very inconsistent with that. So the Alter Rebbe, who's usually in his inimitable style, responded with a Talmudic statement. He says, so halavai, he smiled and said, halavai, may it be that Maimer Chazal should be fulfilled in them, and meruba mida tova. That was his answer. I'll explain. He says, halavai, may it be that certain Talmudic statement should be fulfilled in them, and because in a good thing it should be so many times, many to fold over. What was he referring to? So they didn't understand. They had to go check it out with some of his students. And the Torah explained to them that the Mishnah says, the Talmud or the Mishnah, that if a wealthy person makes believe and behaves like an imposter, like a poor person, so the Talmud says he'll end up becoming poor. So what the Alter Rebbe was saying, so if my Hasidim, who are poor people, make believe like they're wealthy spiritually, they'll end up becoming like that, because we say meruba mida teva, and the good will be many more times than in the negative. In other words, behavior a certain way ultimately makes you become that way, even if you weren't intending to do that. Try it out. Like we were kids and you made monkey faces, that's what they would tell us. You'll soon turn into a monkey. It scared some people, some it didn't. We found out later, either you are a monkey or you're not a monkey. But you get the idea. That certain times, certain procedures, and you repeat them many times, it can have an effect. But then you find in Judaism, and especially in the spiritual side of things, in Hasidic philosophy, Hasidic thought, the concept of avodas Hashem. V'avadatam as Hashem Elokeichem, the Torah says. God says, I don't just want you to do mitzvahs by rote and mechanically. I want you to serve me. I want you to work at it. Refine yourself. Sublimate yourself. It's real, what we call pnimizdika work. And some places actually God rejects and despises mechanical mitzvahs. Despises behavioral robotics. Because it's lip service, it's external. And insists that it has to be with your heart. I want your heart and soul. In Tanya, chapter 15, a brilliant chapter, he brings and cites and says, from a Talmud as well, that a person, Talmud says that a person in the olden days, in the Talmudic times, there was a custom that when you studied any text, you reviewed it 100 times. That was the standard, that's it. 100 times. Pretty good, right? Reviewing a text 100 times, especially someone who has a good mind, you can rest assured they're going to retain it. But the Talmud says, interestingly, that someone who reviews their text 100 times is considered lo yavadai, not someone who served. Only if they do it 101 times, one more time over the 100, then they're considered Eved Elokim, a servant of God. Why? Because the 100 times is a habit. It's a great habit. But you're not doing anything out of the ordinary. Which means you can be a great person, but if it comes easy, you're not refining, you're not working on it. It's not internalized, not integrated. And when is it called avoda? Avoda means you worked at it. You earned it. That's why you see people who, like the Talmud says, you have more pleasure from $1 you earn on your own than from $9 that someone gives you as a gift. You can buy a lot more, 9 times as much. But you'll blow it as well because it's not yours. You have not earned it. So it's not integrated. It may be quantitatively greater, but not qualitatively. So there's that idea of internalizing and working at something internally and getting to the root of it, not just the symptoms. So clearly there's more than just a behavioral model of psychology in Judaism. And though I've not seen it specifically stated, but from my understanding of it, these two schools come together. And just using an analogy, when you're digging, let's say, a well, you really need to do two things. You need to get rid of the outer layers, dig the earth, dig, with a drill or whatever it is, with the shovels deep down. But then, you also need to pump up the water. So there's a natural pressure sometimes, but nevertheless, there's really two steps to the process. I'm applying that to this concept as well. In growth, in trying to access the inner child that I'm describing, to access your best parts inside of you, you really need to do two things at once. You need to behaviorally modify some of your outer behavior, outer habits. That gets rid of the outer layers. But then there's a need to go inside and find something that resonates and that allows the inner waters to emerge. So you really need a combination of both efforts. So a person could have, and every person does have, an angel within. I've been quoting Michelangelo many times here, that when he was asked how does he sculpt those beautiful sculptures, he said, I see the angel trapped in the marble, and I carved and set her free. So every one of us has an angel. Every one of us has a beautiful soul within. But it can get trapped in marble. And you can't just say, you know what, let me just talk to you, to your heart, and try to access your inner beauty. Because that marble can also be concrete, could be other substances that are not so pleasant. And it's not just easy to go to a criminal, just using a harsh example, and just say, you have a beautiful soul, why don't you just shine? Because they've gotten trapped, that's beautiful souls gotten trapped in layers and layers, and you have to address them. So from a healthy psychological point, you really want to do is attack it from both ends. From the outer end is behavioral, trying to modify things externally, and from the inner end is trying to awaken the inner soul, the inner child within. So generally, even though I'm speaking in generic terms, obviously, I'm a believer that you don't have to dig necessarily, unless you have no choice, inside a person's deepest psyche and all their childhood experiences to help them heal. You try to work on a behavioral level and see how much they can do. And only if that doesn't work do you go deeper. But on a positive end, we do need both experiences. In the Hebrew there's an expression, there's a concept called, in the Hasidic lexicon, it's called tshuva tata and tshuva ilah. There's a lower type of return and a higher type of return. The difference is, for example, you find yourself a new home. And you want to bring in new furniture and new furnishings and everything new. But it's a home that hasn't been lived in a while. What's the first step? What you have to do is go and clean it out. Because if it has layers and layers of dust and dirt that have grime, that have collected, to bring new furniture in and to bring new items in, they're just going to get all covered in dirt and dust. So you need to first clean out before you bring something new in. The same is true psychologically. Sometimes a bad habit, or any habit, does not allow a fresh new thing to enter into your life, because that's like the dust that's just sitting there. So you need to somewhat clean up a little your act. And then there's another side of bringing something fresh, or in this case it's not even fresh, it's something that lays buried for a long time. A treasure that lays buried inside of yourself. So you have the Torah that was given at Sinai, consists of two types of mitzvahs, the positive and the negative. 365 negative, 248 positive. The 248 positive, introducing energy. The 365 negative is do not do this, do not do that. And interestingly, even though they're negatives, they are, number one, they're greater in number. Number two, it says when a person doesn't do something bad, it's just as if they did something good. A person who does not do a sin, it's as if they did a mitzvah. Why? Because if you have dust in your life, it doesn't matter how many good things you're doing, the dust will contaminate the good things as well. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do them, but it creates a problem. Sometimes there's the concept of a tevel v'sheretz biyodei. You ever hear of that one? Tevel, we'll talk about tefillah. You go into a mikveh, but you're holding a dead animal in your hand, which is contaminating you while you're purifying yourself. This is not uncommon. we weird human beings are always doing these type of things. You know? It's like a person goes to the wrong where they shouldn't be going, and they kiss the mezuzah before they leave their house. You know, people do this. They have routines, and the way they want God to protect them, even while they're doing what God doesn't want them to do. Like you have the thief that prays to God that he should succeed in his robbery. That's what it says. Gamva pumachtarta rachmanakari. Well, how is that possible? It sounds like an insane person. No. You know, we could have faith, but faith is what's called makif. It hovers. It's not an integrated. We all have elements of this. When you see someone else being a hypocrite, we all go crazy. But when you do it, you always have a reason where it's not so bad. Because that's how it is. We justify things, and we create compartmentalization. It's all part of the dissonance. Inconsistencies is part of human life. I'm not saying even in a critical way. It's what we are. As I said, when you see it in others, it's usually more amplified. But the idea of dissonance is something that's part of all of our lives. So practically speaking, how do you achieve these two types of things? Tackling the so-called dust and the negative, the loisasa and the essa. So you have a disagreement actually, which sounds almost like semantics until you appreciate the depth of it. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael, two great sages, disagreed of what happened in the when the Ten Commandments were uttered. So as I said, the Ten Commandments have some positive mitzvahs, some negatives. Actually 5 and 5. Sometimes other people count them as 6 and 4, but it doesn't matter. There's positive and negative. There's Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am your God, keep Shabbos. Then there's Lo Signev, don't steal, don't rob, don't kill, etc. So Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Ishmael disagree on the following question. When the Jews heard these 10 commandments, what did they say? They obviously accepted them all. But what words did they use? So Rabbi Akiva says, when they heard all 10 commandments, they said yes to everything. When God said, I am your God, they said yes. When God said, keep Shabbos, yes. Honor your parents, yes. Do not steal, yes. Rabbi Ishmael says that when God said the positive commandments, they said yes. And when he said the negative commandments, they said no. The expression of the Medrash goes, al hein hein va'al lav lav. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, al hein hein va'al lav hein. Which means, Rabbi Ishmael says that when they said, as I said, God said do not do, they said no, meaning no, we won't do. Not no, we don't accept. So if you think about it, which is usually many of so-called Bible Talmudic critics say, what is this argument? It's like a ridiculous argument. Who really cares what they said? Their intention was the same. They accepted the 10 commandments. So they said yes. They said no. Why are they arguing? Why would they make such a big issue of what the Jews actually said? Right? It's a simple question. But if you think about it, there's a profound difference between what they in their opinions, and it's rooted in their personalities. Rabbi Ishmael was a Kohen Gadol, was a high priest. Rabbi Akiva was a convert or a child of converts. Even the name Yishmael means Yishmael, God will listen. Akiva comes from the word Akev, the heel, like Yaakov. So Yisrael, Yaakov. But so their names also reflect two different type of personalities. And the difference between their opinion is similar. Rabbi Akiva, in a sense, reflects the perspective of a Baal Tshuva. Someone that was not born until he's age 40, Rabbi Akiva did not know any Torah. Then he became the greatest scholar of all. So he represents seeing the darkness and seeing the positive in everything. So even when God said, no, do not do, Rabbi Akiva saw something very positive in it. Rabbi Ishmael, coming from a high priest and a privileged life, he saw life very simple. There's do's and don'ts. He did not have the power or did not have the experience of transforming darkness into light. Darkness you have to avoid. Rabbi Akiva lived in darkness. And for him, it was a yes even in darkness once he redeemed it. As long as it's dark, it's still a no. But once he redeemed it, he saw the yes even in the no, so to speak. And Rabbi Ishmael saw yes and no and no. We all have these two paths in our lives. Like I said, the child, the inner child, an innocent child, There's yeses and there's nos. A child should not have to experience every darkness, hopefully. But when life takes over and we lose our innocence, and some of us do venture into places that are not so pleasant, you also have an option. I mean, obviously you could stay there, which is not the goal here. But how do you get out of there is by recognizing there's something in that experience that you can turn into a yes. So therefore, all of us, no matter who we are and wherever place you are, have basically multiple paths that we have to embrace. And that's what Sinai teaches us. Number one is we have to access, in some way, by hook or by crook, that child within us. And there are ways. And ways that even right now we do, but we don't necessarily do consistently. When you listen to a song that touches you, or you hear a story, especially one that you heard when you were very young, it brings you back to that place. I think we all at times experience it, but you don't appreciate that it should be a therapeutic tool, in my opinion. A tool that you should do consistently. Not just, oh, I happen to hear a song, oh, that story reminds me. Actually, to initiate it. Initiate experiences that evoke the child in you. And this can be through memories, it can be through reading things, it could be even through pictures. I know it may sound like nostalgic, well, they say, the joke goes, nostalgia is not like what it used to be. Sounds nostalgic, you sit down with a photo album, I'm going to look at a picture of myself as a child. I don't mean it superficially like that. I mean it as actually an exercise to go there. Because you'll be surprised what you can retrieve when you enter into that space. Think of it as a meditation. A meditation, instead of meditating about things that are out there, you're meditating about you, how you were once. And obviously the goal is not to remain in the meditation, it means to act on it. And maybe it can evoke in you a seamless act. Something you would have done as you would have done as a child. You say, well, listen, I'm now an adult, and this is another thing that we have to get beyond. Like they say, men don't cry. One of those social taboos. We're adults now. Why should we try to go back to our childhood? It may be the healthiest thing you'll ever do, is what I would say. Doesn't sound very popular. Why would I? An adult? So sophisticated adult? You see, in Jewish thought, the child is the purest experience. The Baal Shem Tov, till he was age 36, he had to be forced to leave the children and become so-called work with the adults. Because he knew where the truth was. There's a great sage who had an argument with a Kabbalist, actually. The Kabbalist, he said to him, you pray, you have all these intentions of all the spheres and all the worlds as a good Kabbalist. And ani mispal l'daze hatinuk. I pray like a little child prays. L'daze hatinuk, like the child prays. And you have episode after episode, many stories, how the greatest sages will give the greatest compliment to someone who behaves like a child. I don't mean like a child. When we say child, we say, why are you behaving like a child? We usually mean it in a derogatory way. You're immature, what are you crying about? Don't get so emotional, whatever it is. I'm talking about the seamlessness, the purity, the adventure, the enchantment within. And that's a component that society does not appreciate. Not only doesn't appreciate our own inner child, doesn't appreciate children that are actual children. As I mentioned, I always point this out. Sociologists that I know, I always ask them, so how do you measure what's the barometer of a healthy society? So always the same answer: standard of living, how many people are unemployed, how many people have health insurance, bill of freedom and rights, technology, all the things that would make us the most advanced society, obviously. Of course, it's a loaded question, and Torah would say, like the guarantors of the Torah would say, you want to know the health of a society? Look at the welfare of the children. Look how healthy the children are. What kind of homes they're growing up in. What are they getting? Most of us wouldn't think that way, because we think of life as the comforts of life. But if the children are growing up in dysfunctional homes and not getting their emotional needs met, and growing up to be insecure human beings trying to find relief in all kinds of desperate ways, what benefits are technology exactly? You can make money, you can buy time, And I'm not here to knock technologies. I'm just trying to point out how different standards, how extreme difference, how the Torah would define a healthy society and one that's not. And I would submit, and to pull rank, very simple as I say quite often, to me, the most mind-blowing thing is that Abraham, the great philosopher he was, the great thinker, the nonconformist, the pioneer, the free spirit, everything you want. His ultimate greatness was not in all that. It was in the fact that he committed himself. He committed himself to build a family, children, home, in a physical sense, that would continue the legacy. And all his peers, I don't just mean from his generation, all the generations. You have Confucius, you have Buddha, you have Jesus, you have Aristotle, Socrates. You go down the list, all of them. Where are their children? Where are their families? It's not even, they didn't even try. It wasn't even an aspiration of theirs, and it failed. It wasn't, they were into themselves, and they were great, and offered great things, and their perhaps legacy, wisdom remains. But there's no family, not one family on earth that can say it's grandson of Aristotle, the great. And I say that because that means they did not create a workable model that works in perpetuating itself. So if you talk about it from a business perspective, business is about replication. They did not replicate themselves. They did not create a movement, a system that would exist beyond themselves. All their great contributions, it stopped in building a home in this earth. Now, you can imagine a free spirit like an Abraham or like all of these. It's very difficult. It goes against the nature of a free spirit to be domestic, to be grounded, to be worried about how you're going to diaper your children and how you're going to provide for them when you're busy with your highfalutin philosophies. But it does express the ultimate bittul, the ultimate selflessness of a great person. That he doesn't just think about his own philosophies. It's not just about me. So, to go back to the child, we live in a society where we think the adult life is the center of the world. And children are adults in the making, shaping them, Of course they're beautiful and they're cute and people like to take pictures of children and everyone responds to a child. But it's more like a reality show, in a sense. But the appreciation of the child, that the child is the purest thing, closest to God on earth, how many people think that way? The closest thing to God on earth. You want to way to heaven, it's through children, it's not through adults. Adults may have the machines, and they have the power, and they can screw it up for sure, and they also can build great monuments, but a child personality is seamless, and that's the closest thing to heaven on earth. And more fascinating is that it's right inside of you and I, and we were once that, and we're still that. And maybe it's children, not that children are adults in the making, maybe we're adults that are just children that are a little bigger. Now, I'm not suggesting shutting down all the beautiful features that come with maturity. If you can first list them, what they are, that's another story. But let's say you can come up with a nice maturity list. I'm talking about the best of both worlds, obviously. That's why when that scholar said, "Ani mispal l'daze atinuk," he wasn't saying, I want to go back to be 2 years old crawling around on the floor. He was saying, with all my adult benefits, I would love to be able to reconnect to the innocence of a child and just have that and be able to access it at any given moment. That's what he was saying. And when Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses said, Pesi yamin l'chol davar, Pesi. Pesi, in Hebrew, translated sometimes as a fool, but also Pesi is a child. The Medrash says Pesi in Arabic is Pasya. I guess Old Arabic. Anyone speaks Arabic here? Arabic. How do you say child in Arabic? Okay. But the Medrash says Pasya is in Arabic, I guess, as I said. So, and it says that this Pesi has that connection to the child within. So I think, it's more than the scope of this class, but to create a whole series of exercises of how you can connect to that place. And not just, as I said, a nice memory or nostalgia, but truly a way of connecting to purity and knowing that it's with you right here and you can access it and rebuild it in your life. And then there's the second half, which is to shut down or to clean up some of the dust and discover the yes even in the no, so to speak, which only adults can do. After Adam and Eve ate from the tree, after they built the golden calf, now they have the opportunity to discover a yes and a no. What do I mean? Yes, a positive in the negative experiences. So it's a two-pronged attack, one from that end, one from the child end, one from the adult. And the third prong, of course, is what I said before. There's the dust that has to be cleaned up as well. And if you apply yourself, you can really create, I would say, a customized diet, a customized menu of options that you can implement on a daily basis. But you got to be serious about it. So Sinai offers us a moment to reconnect to that inner sense, inner self, the inner child. There's the Baal Shem Tov's Torah that he says that is very relevant here. The two people who were invited to see the king, in explaining the psalm, Tfil Ani, the prayer of a pauper, and then continues about how he pours out his soul to God. So the Baal Shem Tov gives an analogy of two people invited to see a great king. One is a literate, educated scholar, an aristocrat, an adult, let's put it this way. Sophisticated adult. And the second is a pauper, ignorant, illiterate. And they both come to see the king. First comes the educated adult. And he's never been in such a palace before. Because he appreciates it all, he gets so mesmerized that he misses his appointment. He gets caught up with the literature, the collections of ancient literature and art and music, the whole thing, the beauty of the palace. And by the time he realizes, he misses his appointment. Enter the pauper, the child, doesn't know about all these sophisticated collections, can't read, or he knows he can't read, and the rest of all these treasures. And he walks right through all these chambers and goes right into the antechamber, the inner chamber of the king, the Paltan Shel Melech, and spends all the time with the king and asks him for everything, including the blessing that he should be educated enough and to appreciate all these treasures. So the Baal Shem Tov says, when you stand before God, suspend all your sophisticated tools and stand like a child. It's not advocating illiteracy, it's advocating not to take your literacy so seriously. Because there are times where you should suspend it all. Mispal l'daze atinuk. Stand like an innocent child. And then you will be able to gain everything, because you are free. When you empty yourself of yourself and your accomplishments, you're receptive, you can absorb great things that are beyond you. When you're filled with yourself, you may be great, but you can't receive anything else. You can't absorb anything else. It reminds me, our great friend Oscar Wilde said that people think that today in our modern age there's a lower rate of illiteracy, because everybody knows how to read. She says, no, the difference between then and now is today illiterate people know how to read. That's what he says. Interesting take, right? Illiterate people know how to read. And as he also says, I'm only quoting him, it's not like I advocate his lifestyle. People read more and more about less and less. And that was the beginning of the 20th century. I wonder what about things going on today. So the point being is that we have an underappreciated and undercultivated force inside of us that society actually fights all the time. Someone told me, I remember how sad it was for me to hear, a very good guy, and he was in the finance business. And I remember the day very vividly because it was years ago. And he told me that he's climbing the ladder in finance. He's working in one of the big firms. And he told me how much pressure there is on him, besides just plain pressure to produce, but also pressure to compromise some things that he considered to be values that he didn't want to compromise. Subtle things. It began with subtle things. And then I remember the day he told me, something, I can't fight anymore. The pressures to, I'm in this business, I have to swim with the sharks. And then I said to him, but once you cross over, you're never going back. Not that I can go back, but it gets increasingly difficult. And of course, you minimize it. So I meet him from time to time. I met him recently. He had like everybody has their fall. And now it's a whole different world. And he doesn't even remember when he crossed over. That was so sad. Because, once life took over. But to me, it was like a moment I saw a person change. It didn't change immediately. But it was that thing that he gave up. He gave up on his own, on himself, really. For what? For money, basically. And then he had serious fall. Marriage failed. He got other mess up. Which was inevitable. Once you worship materialism, you die by it. You worship what you die by. You live by it and you die by it. But you don't see it when it happens because you get blinded by the immediate. And you get blinded to the fact that I can handle it, or I know where to stop, etc., etc. There's no such thing. Addiction is addiction, and nobody can stop themselves once you get addicted. And addiction comes from somewhere. It doesn't come because anyone wants to get addicted. It becomes because somebody wants something strongly. And then the thing you want becomes more powerful than you. So it's, I guess, a type of inverted take on what I said before, being in the zone where the object and the subject are one. But that's where the subject dominates the object, not where the object controls the subject. In other words, I would say that there are three types of people. There are people who are conscious of experiences. Okay, so there's you and your experience. Then there are people who, in the healthiest sense, seamless, where the experience is part of who you are. And then there's where the object becomes the master and the subject becomes the slave. That's total addiction, where something controls your life. So one has to first assess where you are. And each of us is in a different place and probably different areas of our lives. And like in any type of unentangling, you don't want to, when you get yourself like a bundle of like entangled hair or tangled wires, the temptation is, especially when you're impatient and you got to run, you just start schlepping it from all sides and then it just gets more tangled. The key is to untangle the extremities, the edges, the areas that you can untangle, and just isolate the area that is very complicated. That's how, it's called divide and conquer. That's how you grow. You cannot just tackle it all. You have to find the areas where you can access that inner child in an easy way. Tackle the other things that are harder. There's nothing wrong with the hardest parts that are hard, that have the greatest resistance. You could always set it aside if you are tackling other issues. If it's just procrastinating, then you join PA, Procrastinators Anonymous. That's another problem. But if you're tackling other parts, and usually it's good to have someone that you can consult with, there's much hope. So to sum up, what shall I say is this. First and foremost, you have in you a very beautiful child. You can call it an angel. You can call it a soul. The child doesn't go away. Long before John Bradshaw, and long before Carl Jung, and long before many of the psychologists of our time, the concept of the inner child goes back thousands of years. I said, Ani mispal l'daze hatinuk. This was a great adult speaking, a scholar. The idea of connecting to the pure space, to the place where we were before the tree of knowledge, even to the place when we were submerged in water, is extremely necessary. By Hasidim, they like the farbrengen. A real farbrengen, not to say there are many that are real, but those that are real means you're going and submerging yourself in water with a whole bunch of kindred spirits. And you go into a place that is beyond you. And whether it's through songs or l'chaim or stories or just sharing, you're going away from your ego, because it's not a business meeting. It's not an agenda-driven meeting. Right? That immediately makes it pure. Because it's not about someone gaining something here. Meaning gaining in any personal, profitable, or selfish way. It's about trying to together reach a moment of truth. People come together and do that, you'd be surprised what kind of power it has. So that alone is a method. Maybe you should host something like that. You can call it a farbrengen of the month, or you want to give it another name, fine with me. It's not the name that's important, it's the objective that is. Sometimes people do it, can have a party, cocktails, just getting socially together. But I don't just mean that. It has to be something that's elevating, something that is something that's spiritual. And it doesn't mean one person has to lead it. It just has to be that the common, as I said, kindred spirits. This is one example, and there are many others that could help people reconnect to that place. In a way, Shabbos in the Jewish calendar, that the fact is that every seventh day, etched in stone, is a day that you go back to the essence, that you go back to that inner child, a seamless place. That's why you try to be as little as possible immersed in the material world. You don't want to be involved with objects. You want to be involved with experience. It's a state of being. Every one of the lamatas malachas, every one of the 39 types of work is about doing something. It's you and I'm going to do something. I'm going to sow. I'm going to build. I'm going to die. I'm going to, everything is an act. Shabbos is meant to be, instead of going out and building things, allow the inner to emerge. So you have hundreds of examples where this idea can be applied if you think about it and just don't do it mechanically. Shabbos is also very easy. Okay, Shabbos come to light the candles, daven, sing some songs, eat some chont, and magic. It doesn't work that way. That's mechanical. If you want it to be avodah, personal, integrated, you have to think about it and allow it to apply itself to you and your personal place. So come Shavuos next Tuesday night, is it? Wednesday and Thursday. You have 2 days, and it has the power to go back to the moment of Sinai, a moment of truth, a moment where heaven met earth. And that's where God insisted the guarantors are the children. Not just the guarantors that the Torah will be kept, the guarantors that the innocence will be maintained. God is giving heaven to earth, heaven and earth kiss. He wants it to remain a pure place. Who can guarantee that? Not the ancestors. As great as they were, they're the roots. Yes, they give us the roots. They give us the tools, the genes. But they don't necessarily connect us to that inner place within ourselves. And the prophets give us the vision. They're visionaries. They see the future. So you have the ancestors and the prophets seeing the future. But the future, who lives the future, who guarantees the future, is the ones that hold on to that innocence. So God was saying, not only are your children are the guarantors, that physically your children, because when you teach it to them, you teach your child, even when they become adults, they will not wander away from it. So it's a guarantee. Parents will teach their children. Teachers will teach their students. So it's a guarantee. It will continue. But more than that, it's the spirit of the children. The spirit that they will always maintain that innocence, that seamlessness, where heaven and earth become completely submerged one in another. And that's what we recreate every year in Shavuos. One of the customs which has recently become popular is that everybody comes to hear the Ten Commandments. Even newborn children are brought, which is again the same focus. Obviously it's good for the children. Even newborn children also sense what's going on, but it's also a reminder to remind ourselves about our inner child. Our inner child. And it's about nurturing that inner place. And then of course from Shavuos to carry it throughout the rest of the year. So, I hope I did some justice to the subject, even though it's a pretty big subject matter and really deserves, as I said, a whole series of exercises, activities that can help a person implement this. But I think the first step is to cherish what you have inside of you, which is your child, and to adore your child, and to nurture it. Because children, especially the ones that were not nurtured by parents, are waiting now. The only one there left to nurture them is you, because you're no longer in your parents' home. Now your child waits for you to pay attention to it, and what you get in return will be many times over, because it'll give you the peace. Remember, your child will not let you rest in a world of dissonance. So if you're restless or miserable or anxious, rest assured your child is part of the process. So children that physically, make a racket and make noise, the child inside makes different type of noise. It does not let you get away with living a dissonant lifestyle. And you can silence it for a while, you can numb it, and you can put it to sleep. But you'll hear his voice. I say that in a good way. And Shavuos comes, the voice rises, the guarantor, your guarantor, and guarantor not just of the Torah per se, but also of a life of meaning, of living a life that has fulfilled, cannot happen without the children who are your own child who are going to participate and feed the energy. So, next obviously week is going to be Shavuot, so we will not have a class here, at least not in the physical sense of the word, but hopefully these ideas will carry on. In 2 weeks we shall resume. Philip will give his class tomorrow night. And anyone wants a beautiful class, Philip gives. Philip has been associated with me for many years, a student of mine, a colleague, a friend, and has been teaching for quite a number of years, has his interesting perspective on things. I won't call myself Rabbi Ishmael and you Rabbi Akiva, but Philip has seen the yeses in the nose, and the noses in the yeses for another time. And I shall also say that any way we could help you, any personal part of your journey, including some of the subjects discussed here, I'm more than happy to make myself available. Velvel is a great friend, and a lot of stuff that I've discussed here I have written about, not particularly this subject, this is pretty new, but related subjects about consciousness. And if you want more, as I mentioned, just email us. And if you haven't left your email address, please do so with Velvel or with Chava. She's there. And everyone should have a very, very pleasant week. Respect and honor your child, and it should be a great Shavuos. And it's an honor to sit here with you. Thank you very much.